commercial version of that, not that huge. Oh. People said they used to see it.
How's that power? Wi-Fi? I don't know, you tell me.
You know, and we eat together, extra, you would think.
I could have found out, I every Wednesday comes along, I have a Zoom meeting with some colleagues.
Habits die hard.
Or something to read, or you brought something to read?
Well, anyway, think about it. Somebody else was allowed. Well, if you had a rule like that, we would keep shuffleboards in, you know, it is very loud.
You couldn't do that out of an office.
That's true.
What about the swing?
Yeah, someone said down there, I said. Anyway, thank you, ma'am. Again.
I repeat, if I encroach, please.
Oh, my.
Oh, that'd be great.
He had like 500 pages.
Oh, wow.
That was just type.
Wow. Yeah, he had a lot of life.
He had just some interesting things that I didn't know about.
Yeah.
And I'll keep it in time for your discussion. It's up next Wednesday. Do you want the night? First Christmas. 15.
I'm working on this and also legacy. I joined that and finding out my ancestors.
Oh, I've done that. I've already told that I've been doing 8 hours a day working on it.
Oh my, wonderful.
Yeah, and I got it all.
How far back did it go?
I got all of my family from when they came over from wherever they came over from.
You don't know
But
where?
well, yeah, I do, but I couldn't do the records there. There was, like in French, all written stuff I couldn't do.
Yeah, I couldn't do that.
And then some of them came over so early as a day.
Tony, this one right here.
But
On the call.
just from the hit the US.
Okay.
So 1700s for some of them.
Yeah. Well, I had something England so I could do some English.
Yeah, right. The French was impossible.
Oh.
Handwritten little pieces of scribbly paper, trying to read on the computer.
Oh, gee.
Yeah. In French.
Yes.
And
Oh, boy.
beautiful script.
Could I have one for Susan, please? Susan.
Did you do one?
Come on.
You're fine.
That's the computer there. I think they're taking it.
Can I have
Need
one?
one more?
Please. Sherry, would you? All right. Turn mine back to the phone.
Thank you. I wanted to give to Susan, but she can't.
There you go. We're not gonna consider you board.
Is that okay?
Yeah. Well, good morning. Thank you all for coming. So, if you don't know me, my name is Jerry Hancock. I'm used to being in this room, but I'm singing, so if I burst into song, you'll forgive me. Anyway, thanks for being here today. Bob Cooke, who's former dean of faculty at Cornell University, is helping out here. He's also very involved in producing memoirs and has produced a number for some of you folks. So I'm going to let him talk first, then I'm going to talk a little bit about the production of the memoir and about the writing process too. So Bob, what's yours?
Okay. Let me see if I can, see if it's gonna let me in. There. Well, okay, there we go. Okay, my interest comes at this partly from a large extended family, And I had a number of relatives who kept records. I never did. And so I inherited some of their work and collaborated with them and turned it into a more permanent form. But my own personal interest has been in the technology end of it, rather than the writing end of it. So Jerry and I complement each other's interests. And as he alluded to, I've participated in a few projects here at the Pines, and I'll list some of those for you. And I'll take a slightly more general definition of memoir. I think of mine as creating a record of the family history, not just of the individual. I came along after World War II, and we had many large extended family gatherings on each of the different branches of the family. And I've got some books with 75 or 100 people gathered. So let me just run through some of the possibilities that might interest you. And this is not an exhaustive list. This is just an indication of some of the things that I'm interested in. First of all, books. And if you are thinking about the last 20 years, book is now extended to a digital form as well as a paper form. And maybe 25 or 30 years ago, audio recording became very easy. And more recently, video recording, personal camcorders became easy to use and relatively inexpensive. So I've experimented with each of those technologies, and here are some examples of some of the things. And I do have on the table over here a collection of items so you get a sense of the physical item, and you can do that after we adjourn. But autobiographies, biography, examples of a person's work, medical records, sermons, public lectures, family histories, genealogy, personal histories, oral history interviews, booklets. So the book doesn't necessarily have to be this large, thick item. And furthermore, it doesn't have to be a public item. It could be entirely a personal item. It's now inexpensive enough. A few years ago, if you wanted to print a book, you needed to sell several hundred copies in order to make it worth investing in. But today, with on-demand printing, you can get one copy. But if you get 10, the price drops because of the upfront setup charge. So it's the economics have totally changed, and the technology has totally changed, so it's now very inexpensive. And something I hadn't, let's see, well, finish my list. Yearbooks, newspaper articles, tributes, publication list, curriculum vitae, and memorial services. I've done several for residents here at the Pines. What do I focus on? It's whatever is interesting. And I was very slow in realizing that it really is about storytelling. I never made that obvious connection that it's about storytelling. The audience can be just for yourself, could be for your family, could be for a community, could be for the public, and it may not be even intended for sharing with anyone else. Perhaps at least while you're alive, while you control it. Level of sophistication, you choose. Pencil and paper is quite adequate to do certain kinds of things. Personal computers were a game changer. And with a computer, say if you buy a Macintosh, it comes bundled with all of the software you would need to be able to produce some of these items. Word processor, ability to collect photographs and archive and collect them and retrieve them, video and photo editing. And you can either do this yourself or you can hire professional service assistants, but the choice is largely related to your interest and how much you want to spend on it. So you can either spend almost nothing at all, because the vast majority of the residents of the Pines have a computer. So there's a lot, really a lot you can do without spending any money. The end product is usually a PDF, portable document format file that has quickly become the standard for turning something into print. So if you put it in a PDF, and the Macintosh, you can, well, in Word or in the Windows, you can turn any kind of file into a PDF. And the idea is that you get a format that can be read across different brands of computers. Video and audio editing. I was astonished that audio editing is like photo editing. You can not trust photographs anymore because you can change them however you wish. And you can do the same thing for audio. To my surprise, some of my ancestors had collected Edison gramophone cylinders. And I eventually had those digitized. And with the editing, you record a few seconds at the beginning of the program, and there's some mechanical noise that you can then take a snapshot of and say, subtract this noise from the entire program. So the gramophone cylinders are actually better recordings now than they were originally, which was sort of a surprise to me. DVDs used to be the main distribution. That has really changed a lot lately. Distribution, not at all. Personally printed copy, and there are a lot of print services in the area. Or professionally edited and bound books, and do them online for free distribution or not. And so I'll now go to a sampling of some of these. How am I doing on time? 5 minutes more? Okay. Let me just run through some of these, and if you will, any catches your eye and want to see it after we adjourn, if you want to come by, I'll show you what they look like. So here's Judy Gable, and her subtitle was, I Just Wrote It For Myself. And that's an entirely legitimate and a reasonable thing to do financially as well as otherwise. Her spouse had autobiographical notes and then a lot of letters. Here's one from a top line here. Jackson was a roommate of mine in college. When he retired, he taught his adult Sunday school class at a Presbyterian church in Raleigh, White Memorial. And he did it for 17 years, and he was very serious about it. And so he turned it in, I turned it into a book for him. So it's 1,172 pages. He went through the entire Bible. Quite a monumental undertaking. Richard James was a retired medical doctor. When he was in practice, he had to work really long hours. When he retired, he read the literature, the primary research literature, and made it available to colleagues free, just as a service to keep them up to speed. And so I did 5,413 pages for him. And then Maloney, legend around here, Sam made driving trips cross-country solo, and his son John did a narrative for it, and I put those together as a sample up here. John did his own autobiography, and Doug Oldenburg, now deceased, had a collection of sermons, so there was a book of 100 sermons, and he was Claudia was about to throw away his lecture notes from all of his career. I said, no, you can get a scanner for $100 and save them. And so the son gave him a scanner, she scanned them, and so there are 3,413 pages of his sermon notes. They were not distributing it, but it's easier to save a disc than it is to save a room full of paper. I did a video postcard from the Pines. I was actually bragging about the Pines, nagging my friends back in Ithaca, New York, about the beautiful weather. So this was dogwoods in bloom, and so I had to make a video. We did a driving tour of the campus. Then I did another one that was Snow Day, and Jane Campbell recorded the holiday parade here in 2020, and I got permission to turn it into a video that's online, and turned it into a booklet. And the booklet I managed to get a shot in the printed version of every single employee as an appreciation because they were helping us get through the pandemic. Tom Wood is a nephew of John Wood, our neighbor, he's given 2 lectures, Biblical Coins of the Holy Land, Holding History in Your Hands.
That was great.
And I had gently nudged when we came here that the Pines ought to record some of these things that are worthy of preserving and sharing with people who just couldn't come exactly at that moment in time. It hasn't been done, but this was a separate one. And you've seen the Pines Connect, and I have a printed copy of that up here. The Rawsons were, I think, the first 2 from the Pines to die of COVID. He got it, and then she visited him, and then there was a joint funeral, and I have a video of that. Molly Sloan, who's in the audience, over many years wrote recollections and put it together, and she and I put it into a book, and there's a copy up here. Betty Burgess Warren is a local who graduated from Cornelius High School. She had copies of the yearbook from 47 and 48, and I restored those and have a copy up here. In fact, I was in the 2nd grade and was able to get a class picture. Duke Williams had a relative who had been on the faculty at a seminary in St. Louis, and these were the letters of tribute from retirement, and so we saved those. John Williamson is a more recent member from here, and he had collected his publications, and I put them together for his family. You know, he was in genetics, deep into genetics, and the rest of the family is not going to be terribly interested, but as a keepsake, it's nice to see what tracks he left in the sand. Here's some things from the family. I have a brief family history, and it was done when the Augusta Lee Project was going. I have a sister, Marilyn, who wrote a book about one of our favorite uncles, Great Day in the Morning, which was one of his favorite expressions. And it covers his early years, so we've got a lot of genealogy, several generations chart back. It's got pictures when he was a child, and plus my father, his brother. And then the war years, and she tracked back and found a lot of the records of where he went in Europe. He was in the Battle of the Bulge, and pretty miserable set of conditions. And then the later years, he collected a lot of animals, and so the local folk know that he had, over the years, a wonderful collection of animals, zebras, buffaloes, peacocks, you name it. A copy of that's on the table up here. His sister, my aunt, did Echoes of the Past. This is my mother, and we did a family tribute and had members of the family write letters of appreciation to her while she was still alive. And this is one from her funeral, and it was just a visual biography, which I have up here. And as I mentioned, after the war, between World War II and the Korean War, we had a lot of family reunions. I don't know why they became less popular, but this is one in 1949. I was 10 years old, and we got a group picture. Older brother, Charles, a Davidson grad, I did his curriculum vitae for him, and he has done 3 books of quotations. He reads widely and collected them, and it was called Quotations and Stories, Some Wise and Some Otherwise. And then I attended Cornelius Elementary School in junior high, and this is a recent project. I went back and I got 1st grade picture, 3rd, 4th, you know, and I don't have all of them yet, but I'm working on it. Another local guy who was a year after me, Robert Davidson, his father was on the faculty at Davidson, wrote an article each week in the local newspaper about our high school, so it's got a history of our high school years, and I've restored that and shared it with classmates. But it'll astonish you the things that seem commonplace. The high school in North Mecklenburg even sanctioned and helped us get a pull-off so the kids could thumb ride home. And you imagine doing that now. I mean, make hair stand on the end. Here's Nancy's, my wife's ancestors, and then there's a photo album of her from a childhood up. We lived in New York for 50 years, and so I wanted my family to stay in touch with the family here. And so we would call once a week just to touch up our accent, but we wanted the kids to know other family members. So we decided to set up a weekend, the 4th of July week, trip to Ocean Isle Beach, which is on the coast of North Carolina. And that had gone on for 20 plus years. And so I collected, there were several photographers in the family, and I made video, and so we collected that. Oral history, before I left Ithaca, I had organized a group of oral histories of faculty, senior faculty, retiring faculty. I had several hundred of them, and if you're interested, I can describe the process we used, but mine is online. And I recorded older brother, my youngest brother, and interviewed my older brother, and did one called Charles Remembers. And then Betty and Marilyn, Betty's in the audience, while we were at Ocean Isle Beach, recorded some recollections of their early years. And one sister did a history of Mount Zion, which is nearby, a very, very old church. And Betty's spouse did Junebug on a String, which was his life growing up in the small town of Dorada, Small Bend. So I think I'll stop there.
Okay. Thank you. Well, let me sort of supplement what Bob has said a little bit from the perspective of how to go about this, as well as maybe some of the content. Bob did a good job of talking about how the different versions of a memoir might turn out, from videotape, audio tape, to booklets, scrapbooks, whatever form you want it to take. The important thing to keep in mind there is whether you want to distribute it or not. If you want other people to have a copy of it, then you obviously need to either publish it or put it in some form that other people can use. But I think my goal here today is to get you to do a memoir. And maybe you haven't planned to do that, maybe you haven't thought about it, maybe you have already started it or almost finished your memoir. And my goal is to get you to take that and do something with it, because I've heard from a lot of people around here that they have either started a memoir or pretty far along with it, but they don't know where to go to the next step with it. And as Bob indicated, there are numerous ways to go about it. And if you think about it, really all a memoir is just a historical account of your life or somebody's life put down in a way that other people can share it. And whether it's an autobiography or a memoir, it's sort of a fine line of distinction. But the important thing is that you need to get this stuff down so your family can enjoy it and reference it for years to come. I really am angry with myself that I didn't do this with my mom. I mean, I did some talk with my mom, and I wrote some of her stories in my own autobiography, but I should have sat down with a video recorder and just talked for hours with her, because she had stories that went on and on. And same for my sister. When my older sister died, she had some of those same stories. I didn't bother to get that. I did, however, get an audio tape of my younger sister as she developed Alzheimer's, and I could tell that she was starting to deteriorate, so I went ahead and got that interview with her. So that's now available for her and her family, and I did the same thing for my brother-in-law. But what Bob was saying is true. You can either spend a lot of money on this, or you can spend nothing. In the case of my sisters, I simply took a telephone and sat down with them and recorded it. So that is now transferred over to a video disc, and they can use it forever. So that costs nothing. On the other hand, some of the books that we've produced up here can cost as much as $10,000. It just depends on what you want to do with it and what kind of distribution you want to take. But the important thing as you think about this is think about what value does this provide to my family? Not for me. For me as the writer, it's just a point to get my thoughts on paper. But to the family, this is important stuff. It's a reference that they can use for years to come. And even if you don't feel like you've got a lot of stories, and I think I felt that way when I started writing my own, the more I sat down and thought about it, the more the stories came to me. And so I got those down, got them documented, so that when somebody says, well, when did Uncle Ned go to war? It's in my book, so you can look at that. And there's no longer a question about that. And there's another reason you should write a memoir. That is that it gives us all a sense of place and identity. I run into people all the time who don't seem to have a sense of place. They don't have a large family. They don't have a lot of roots. But the people who know and love them want to know more about them and have that kind of detail. So I'm actually following this outline if you want to go along with me so I can sort of talk about the content of this outline. But if you've got questions, feel free to raise your hand as we go through it. The question of format, down about the fourth item down. Again, this is your document, this is your memoir. I want you to feel free to take it in whatever direction you want. The main thing, as Bob said, is get it in a format that somebody can do something with. A printer is going to want it in a Word document or in a TXT file, or it will eventually wind up in a PDF format. Those are words you don't need to worry about. Somebody will take care of that for you. But the important thing is to get it down. If it's handwritten, that's fine. Somebody can read it into a phone and transcribe it, or you can pay somebody to transcribe it. And here's what I would like you to think about. Is there a member of your family who can help you with this? For example, a granddaughter, a niece, or nephew, or somebody who would be willing to help you put this information down so that it can be used. And of course, the more steps you have to go through, of course, the more expenses that are involved. But the important thing is that you decide that it's worth doing, and that your family would want to keep this for some time to come. So the question about photographs. Do I use photographs? Do I use color? Do I use black and white? Obviously, color photographs cost more to produce than black and white. But a color photograph produced in black and white in your book doesn't cost any more than the type that's on there. So keep that in mind as you think about the content of your book. We've got, lots of us have these shoeboxes full of photographs, but how many of them are real useful and tell a story or supplement your story? And the important thing is to use those sparingly in your book so that they help advance the story. You don't want every photograph in there. In fact, most photographs are probably not usable for that purpose anyway. They're blurred or they have some other defects. All right, so how do we go from the manuscript to the book? That's the question a lot of people have. And the important thing there is, again, to get the manuscript finished, get it proved, get somebody to look at it, get somebody to give you feedback, get all the errors out of it, get it in a format that you want to use, and then either take it to a printer or someone like Bob or me who can help you get it into a final format to take it to press. There are lots of little quirks along the way that you need to know about. For example, one thing I find that a lot of people who print a document don't think about the fact that if it's going to be in a book, the inside margin needs to be larger than the outside margin. That's a tiny little detail, but you don't want to be pulling the book open to try to read the entire book on the left and right margins. And little details like that make a big difference. So how does it get priced? Well, the quality of the paper you use, whether you use softback or hardback, and we have samples up here of all of those so you can see what they look like. But all of those things factor into the final cost of it, as well as the number of copies. But as Bob said, there are now print-on-demand services. You can print one copy or you can print 1,000 copies. Obviously, the price per each comes down the more you do, but the important thing is that you have to start from, it's like building a house. If you go to build a house, you got to have a bathroom and you got to have the main ingredients that go into a house, the kitchen, for example. Those are the two expensive things. Everything else is an add-on. Same in doing a book. You've got to have a certain amount of content to go into the book, and then add on extra pages. That just adds to the expense, but in a much less percentage-wise. So, in addition to books, what are the other options? Bob mentioned several of them: video, audio, any ways you want to do that. I'll just say that if you do a video, it depends on how professional you want it. If you want it like broadcast quality, it's going to take a lot of money to edit that and get it down to the final form. If you want it just for something that the family can enjoy and you don't care about the fact that it has a few errors in it, that sort of thing, then it's probably less expensive and you can get somebody to do that pretty easy. And as he said, the software is already on most of our computers to allow us to do that if you want to learn that or get a family member to help you put that together. And here's the interesting thing. Think about the first record you listened to. Was it a 78? then what did you listen to next? 45, and then what? 33, and then what? 8-track, cassette. What are you listening to now? Streaming or MP3s? Look at all the iterations those have happened just in the last, 50, 75 years. I don't know what the next iteration is going to be. So the important thing is, whatever format you put your broadcast or audio or video memoir in, it's got to be translatable into the future. And usually there's an overlap where you can get that done. But how many of you have VHS tapes, for example, still in your closet that you can't watch because you don't have a VHS playback machine anymore? There are machines that will transfer that to a DVD and then put that on a thumb drive and whatever, so that it'll be useful into the future. But I would just suggest that you keep that in mind as you think about that. And then the next question, how many copies do you want? Well, do you want just one for yourself, or do you want 10 for the family, or do you want 100 for all of the relatives? Is that a Christmas present you're going to give to everybody? Do you want to put it on YouTube so everybody and his brother can look at it? And that's not a bad idea if you want to get the cheap way to distribute it. Make a copy, put it on YouTube, and give it to or link to your friends. There's some other incidental expenses. I mentioned the ISBN number. That's just the number that you see on the back of most books, which libraries require that. And if you want to put a copy of your memoir in your hometown library, they're going to expect you to have an ISBN number on it. And a lot of people get concerned about copyright, but keep in mind that when you write it, it is already copyrighted, especially if you put the copyright symbol at the front of your book. If you want to go through the process of copyrighting it through the Library of Congress, you can do that, and that costs extra money. It doesn't give you any more protection in the long run. It's very doubtful somebody's going to challenge the copyright of your book anyway. But there are all sorts of questions about that. And then how long does the process take? I would say generally you ought to count on 6 to 8 weeks from start to finish. Once you get a manuscript done, and different stages along there will take different amounts of time. And then can you get somebody to do it for you or help you do it, or could you do it yourself? Absolutely. Any of those are possibilities. And you can mix and match. You can do part of it yourself, give part of it to somebody else. People like Bob and I can help you take it at whatever level it is and take it to the finished product if that's what you want to do. I put a number in there because everybody always wants to know, what's it going to cost me? And I draw a budget between $5,000 and $10,000. But that's if you really want to do a nice book that you're going to have multiple copies of, and you're going to distribute it to a number of people. And you can think about this, you do want it to be something that's going to hold up over time, that's going to look well for family and friends well into the future. You can see some of the examples up here that we've done. I worried about that a little bit when I did my family history, because I thought, well, it's being printed on a copying machine. It's a glorified copying machine, but it's still a copy machine. Will those pages stick together over time? Will they bleed onto each other and that kind of stuff? Most of those are not real concerns, but they are concerns and things you ought to think about as you put your book together. What's the next step? I would suggest you take this document home, talk about it with your family, and decide how you want to go about it, and if you want to spend the money to do it the proper way, or if you just want something that you can pass along. But by all means, do it. If nothing more than a handwritten version that you circulate to just your immediate family, that's fine. Or if you want to photocopy it and put it in a little binder, that's nice too. Again, you haven't spent a whole lot of money so far. Or if you wanted to make it really nice and something that'll go on the bookshelf and family and friends will look at forever, that'll be something worth having as well. You can go to the Pines Library. There's a section now on authors that are in the Pines, so you can see some other examples of people's books that have been written here. And of course, we've got samples up here, and I'd encourage you to look at them and maybe ask questions about those. I want to talk just one more minute about the writing process, and the rest of this document is a sort of a template for how you might organize your memoir, and that's all it is. It's just a suggestion, because a lot of people have trouble getting started or knowing where to take the document once you get started. So what this is a sort of paid by numbers arrangement. So if you just answered all these questions, you basically have written your memoir. The first example is one that's written chronologically, where you tell your story from birth to death and whatever process you want to use. And then the second approach, which is on page 4, is called the thematic approach. And that's where you take something that's important to you in your life calling or your ministry or whatever it is, and then build your document around that. In other words, all of the things that led you up to that particular decision in your life. And you can look over that on your own time and decide which approach you want to use. Most people use the chronological approach, and of course that makes the most sense, but it's almost impossible to stay in a purely chronological approach because the story is going to bounce back and forth in time as you write it, and that's okay too. But I want to talk just one more minute about the writing process. A lot of people think you have to write like a reporter when you're doing a memoir, right? You just the facts, man. You know, I was born on this day, went to grammar school on this day, went to high school on this day, graduated. That's a very boring memoir. But you can use it. I mean, that's a process. But what I'm going to suggest is something that a professor out in the Midwest has a course called Creative Nonfiction. Now, what does that sound like? That sounds like a lie. But what it is taking the facts, the substance of what happened in your life, and then interpreting it in a way that makes it interesting for people to read. And I'm going to give you an example from my own life. I'd like to tell you the story and then read you my description of it. My dad died when I was 10 years old. And here are the facts about how I learned about that. I was in my 4th grade class. My teacher noticed that the principal was at the back of the room. He called her to the door, asked for me to come out, bring my books. I took my books home with me. My siblings were already there. My mother was missing, but there were lots of other relatives around. I didn't have any idea what was going on. And eventually found out that my mom was in a bedroom in shock and basically not able to really talk to anybody. So those are the facts. That's the environment that I came into it. But when I wrote my little autobiography, I wanted to make that story stand out because it had a lot of impact on me, as you might imagine, for a 10-year-old. And what are the stories that happen to you that matter and that you want to focus on? There's an old precept in art that says emphasis on everything results in emphasis on nothing. And so I would suggest you take certain events for your life, if you're writing a memoir, for example, and focus on those, write that story in a different way than you might write the rest of the memoir, just because those things really mattered and they matter to the folks who read this. So here's my little story. You heard the facts, and here's how I wrote it. He was only 10 years old. Nothing could have prepared him for what was to happen, and it would take years to sort out all the pieces. He was sitting in the 4th grade classroom listening to Mrs. McBride dispense information about the importance of a title in writing documents. The October sun was glaring off the natural stain of his seat desktop, exaggerating the deep scratches and crude etchings from previous visitors to that chair. Suddenly, Mrs. McBride stopped and looked toward the back as the school principal, Mr. Hart, summoned her to the door. She stepped outside for a private conversation, and within a minute or so, she was rounding the boy up with his books to leave the principal. What is this all about? What's going on? Was he being summoned to the principal's office for some unknown bad behavior? He was above all compliant. Why was he to take his books? He did as he was told. The window in the steel door at the end of the hall let in specific rays of sunshine that glistened on the long hallway floor of varnished pine, fresh with the smell of bananas from the weekly oil treatment. Looking up at Mr. Hart and juggling his books, the walk seemed to take forever. Arriving at the principal's office, he was surprised to find his 2 sisters and brother already waiting. The 4 of them were hustled into Hart's Rambler station wagon. It was all so mysterious. Hart started the car. His voice was somber. He turned to each child and made eye contact with each child and said, "Your mom has asked me to bring you kids home. I'm taking you there now." The kids looked at each other with surprise and confusion. What could this be? As the car entered the driveway at home, he noticed cars of his aunts and uncles and a black limousine from Ladies' Funeral Home. Inside, various relatives were milling around, but his mom was not there. So he asked. He was told she was in the bedroom with a terrific headache and in shock. He made his way to her bedside and put his hand in hers, but not much was said at first. She just looked at him. "You've got no daddy," she finally said. He sat by her, not knowing what to do or even what that meant. His father was in the hospital, true, but he was recovering from a mild bout of pneumonia and planning to be home that very day. Suddenly, chaos reigned as he digested the horrible news. What would be the impact of this? How could a 10-year-old grasp a 47-year-old father being plucked from the family, never to return? How will this affect things? Who will take us to school? Who will prepare dinner? Who will buy the groceries, pay the bills? All these were pertinent, relevant questions. The question that was not asked was, who will play ball with me? Who will tie my Sunday tie when we go to church? Who will show me how to whittle? These questions were largely irrelevant because his father had never done those things with him anyway. He had mostly been a safekeeper of his mom since he was a toddler, sitting on the floor by her sewing machine, playing with the empty thread spools as she pieced together dresses for his sisters, watching millions of dust particles dancing in the sunlight from the bright kitchen window. The next couple of days were even more chaotic. Dozens of friends and relatives crowded the tiny house. There were lots of hugs, lots of tears, and mostly shock and dismay at what God had visited on this poor family. He got his share of hugs too. Everyone seemed to hold him longer than usual, but no one explained anything. Through it all, the minister, who lived next door, was there hovering over events and members of his flock as all the drawn faces and empty eyes seemed to look at every corner of the house for an answer. This was otherworldly. From his perspective as a 10-year-old, there were two worlds in play here. He could see a few kids in the room at his level, but the real action was happening a couple of feet higher among adults who were mostly lost in their own confused comforting of each other. He felt alone, a feeling he had come to know years earlier because both his parents worked in the local textile mill. His dad worked first shift, his mom second, his mom leaving for work just an hour before his dad would come home, and immediately start work on something around the house or his garden. So it felt only weekends that both parents were at home. But that time got eaten away by chores and church, so aloneness was not a new experience. Soon every inch of the kitchen table was covered with every genre of food from neighbors and church ladies with tight curls and cheap perfume. His grandfather, Lon Jordan, and Aunt Esther from South Carolina showed up. More hugs, more tears. Curiously missing was his mom, who was still in the dark bedroom with the shades drawn. An aunt held a washcloth to her head and looked up as he entered again. He closed the door behind him, muting the cacophony of song of voices in the rest of the overstuffed house and dousing the last rays of light from the other room. He wanted to do something, but came up empty as to what. He wanted to comfort his mom, but she lay still, eyes closed in some other galaxy. He watched silently for a moment, then getting no acknowledgement of his need or even his presence, he walked back into the sea of grown-ups, many of them now eating the rendered cheese squares and lemon tarts church folks had dropped off. Yes, chaos. Nothing made sense, and nobody seemed willing to explain. After all, he was operating below adult radar, and to most of the visitors, he was invisible. The oblong rotary dial phone on the wall, constantly ringing, added to the din, louder now than before. Whoever was closest to the phone would answer the caller's questions between tears and sobs. Using his well-tuned ears, he was capturing bits of intelligence no one had shared with him. Small details like who was already present, who was coming, plans for the service, and a roll call of relatives and in-laws and their status. But nothing about his future or that of his siblings. Nothing about how daily life was to happen, and no report on what he needed most, some degree of certainty. Why was this happening to him? As the evening grew darker, the crowd began to thin. aunts and uncles remain. Their conversation darted from updates about family and their plans to childhood recollections and back to the matter at hand, the unexpected death. There were a few laughs, some silences, and some tears from time to time. Next day, breakfast was barely finished before the onslaught of visitors began, the chatter of a constant hum, accented by the insistent ringing of the phone on the den wall. Soon it was lunchtime and the long dark hearse arrived. The driver backed up close to the front door, the front steps that his father had built, and soon several men were heaving the casket containing the body of his father into the living room. The casket was set to rest on a scissors-like steel platform which soon covered with red velvet fabric. Men in dark suits from the funeral home brought in lamps which cast a muted light and distorted shadows upward to the white ceiling. The casket was opened and the delicate lacy trim was folded outward. Then he saw his father's body in the same suit he had worn in the Easter pictures they had made together just a few months ago. He stood there alone as the funeral home man continued to tidy up the arrangements and then produced a pedestal, guest book, and funeral home pen, so that everyone who saw this body could append their name and witness. So just, I mean, I know that took a lot of time, but I want to ask you a question. What impression did that leave with you?
You were, I mean, you could feel like you were the little boy the whole time. Not you, but listening to it. But it was in third person, not first person, is that what you?
Isn't that interesting?
I was interested in that too. It started out that you were backing off from what you were trying to tell.
Right. So,
You could visualize it, and you could really picture what
lots
was
of
going on. It was wonderful.
lots of
Those-
images, right?
Yes, images. I could see that whole scene in my
I
mind.
assume, anything else you'd observe about it?
You weren't going too deep into your younger version's feelings.
Yeah,
Maybe you
As you were letting actions
right.
dictate, and it
So
may be
what
very
about you?
appropriate for this situation.
What I want you to get from this, earlier I gave you the report of the event, right? Those were the facts. But then I interpreted that into a feeling document telling you how I felt at each moment of the event and why that was important to me as the writer of this. So let me just ask you a question. Does that seem disloyal to you in some way or inappropriate for the writing of a memoir?
I thought it was beautiful.
Storytelling.
Well, I mean, I would say that when I wrote the book, I probably spent way more time on this piece than I did on the book as a whole. And so this is what I'm asking you to do. When you think about your own memoir, your own content, think about how you felt during that. What was the feeling? What was the emotion? What was the environment like? What did you see? What visual symbols stuck out to you that you still remember? I mean, you heard them talk about the hallway as you walked to the principal's office and stuff like that, and the desk with the etchings on the desk, right? I don't know. Did that really happen? I think it did. It happened sometime during school, and so I know that those images sort of flow together, but it makes for a nice story, and I don't think it's disloyal to the truth. And so I would ask you to think about that as you do your own writing. Would that make you uncomfortable to write that kind of?
see the banana oil on the floor. That was
I'm sorry.
the banana oil you said on
Yeah.
the floor. I mean, those little things, those touches, make it more.
Right. For a kid, you know, especially pay attention to that, right?
Jerry,
Yeah.
I thought that was beautiful, and my father was killed in a wreck when I was 10 too.
Mhm.
So I wrote mine. It's one page.
Oh,
It's very different. May I read it?
sure.
It won't take long, folks. Mama told me she had ordered a special surprise, a leather jacket for Dad's 1946 Christmas present. On the morning of his birthday, December the 14th, it was cold, and she decided to give him the jacket as a birthday gift. He was so proud of that new coat and he wore it every day to work until he was killed in a Jeep wreck 5 days later. Life changed completely. I was working on Christmas decorations with friends at the teacherage when the word came. The making of holiday decorations was a part of the Christmas season. Peggy Judge, her Aunt Lida Bostic, and several friends met in the teacherage a few doors down from the post office where my mother was postmaster to make Christmas decorations on December the 19th, 1946. We had a variety of materials to make tree hangings and wreaths and plenty of cookies for snacks. Miss Bailey, the principal's wife, came in the room and said, "Miss Lida, step outside the hallway. I need to speak to you a few minutes." And they both came back in the room, and Miss Bailey said, "Molly, your mother needs to see you. I want you to come home now." I followed her to the car, got in, and noticed she was upset. I said, "Miss Bailey, what's the matter?" And she just said, "Your mother will tell you," and by that time, I knew something was drastically wrong. She pulled up to our door, and I bounded out and ran inside to the living room. The room was full of people. It seemed everybody in the community was sitting around in our living room, and Mama was on the couch crying. I was so relieved to see that she was all right. I sat down beside her and hugged her and looked around the room and then back at Mama. Her daddy's had an accident in a Jeep, and it's very bad. My first words were, "Let's go to him." And I stood up and pulled at her, but she gave me a hug and told me it was too late. Having a funeral during the Christmas season was particularly difficult. All the joy of anticipation was gone. It was the busiest time of the year in the post office, and expressions on people's faces changed from the holiday spirit into sadness. My mama's piano playing changed from Christmas carols to "God be with you till we meet again." I did not know what to do with myself. We were alone that Christmas, just the two of us. And now I wonder why none of her relatives came or invited us to be with them. It was probably because having that much sadness around would ruin any holiday. Actually, Mama probably knew the heavy load of Christmas mail would prevent her from going anywhere anyhow. And that would certainly keep her mind occupied. As we learned more about the accident, we still didn't learn enough. We knew he died immediately, coming from Wallace toward Chinquapin, veering across the highway. No autopsy was given. Did he go to sleep? Did he have a heart attack like his father at age 45? There was no certainty. Mama asked questions, but I didn't pay much attention to anything related to how the accident happened. I just grieved that he was gone. His shoes, his billfold, his clothes were handed over to her, all except the new leather jacket. Mama asked about the jacket, but it seemed that it had vanished. Her only comment was, "I'm so glad I gave it to him on his birthday." And the jacket, of course, was never found. On the first day of school after Christmas, I dreaded going back because I anticipated classmates offering sympathy and I didn't want to cry anymore. But exactly the opposite happened. Miss Batchelor, my teacher, must have told the class about my father's death and told them not to mention it because nobody did. Instead of sympathy, classmates ignored me, couldn't look at me. They went on as normal, excluding me. It seemed classmates thought my tragedy was contagious. Now I understand that something so awful makes people try to compensate by pretending nothing has happened. But it was the first time it had happened to me. A lesson learned. It's better to acknowledge tragedy with an "I'm sorry," but never "it was God's will" or "you'll get over it." It hurt that nobody in the class seemed to recognize my world had collapsed. Much later, when I was looking at the keepsakes, the letters that came in, I found the cards from the flowers that were sent to my father's funeral. There were 45 different funeral arrangements and different cards, and one of them read, "From your 5th grade class at Chinquapin School." They did care. I just didn't know it at the time. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, that was wonderful. But do you see the emotion that she shows in there, and it's unapologetic emotion. It's genuine and it's real and it feels very natural for what happened. And that's really all I'm encouraging you to do is you write, and not just put chapter and verse of what happened, and how you felt about it, how the family felt about it, what the circumstances were, what the impact was, all those things. I mean, I gave you this little outline to use purely as a prompt, and you can fill out those questions and have a pretty good story. But I'm asking you to think about how you felt about all those events and work that into your story. As Bob said, it is about the story. It's only incidentally about your memoir, right? Let me just ask you now what questions you have about either this document or anything either Bob or I have said.
I also had some, couple examples I could put on the screen, but also I said if you saw something there, I'd be glad to bring it up, but I'll do those after we adjourn. Should I show a couple of minutes of just a glimpse? Okay. Let me see. All right. Okay, here is the one that Molly just read, and let me bring it over the screen. So,
That was 40 years ago.
so there's the cover. This is 8.5 by 11, and copies up here, and table of contents, and lots of pictures. And the stories are woven around the pictures, and unlike a scientific article where you say figure 5, just the pictures are adjacent to the commentary, so it's clear how it related to the story. So you've got a sense, these are black and white, and all photographs needed to be cleaned up in Photoshop to improve the legibility of them. Some people prefer having it look old and would rather not have it changed, but this was modified. So there was a wedding picture. Anyway, that gives you some sense that the photographs add a lot to telling the story. Now let me see, I think I have one more that I would show you. Right. Looking for. There it is. Okay, here's the one about the uncle. And when you're a scientist, you often say in your papers, here's a typical example, when in fact you mean, here's the best data I have. So I'll be fair and say, here's one that was many months was spent working on this. So that's the uncle. Let me just show you, my brother made the photograph. Let me zoom in on this. And he's in his work clothes. His shoestrings are broken. The socks don't match. He has overalls, sitting on the ground, but you look at his eyes and you see the man's okay. He's a happy man. So let me go back and, so there's a fan chart showing multiple generations back. There's a picture, the same picture on the cover, but this one's been colorized. The original was not colored. So just to give you an illustration of what can be done now with the software tools. And so there's a table of contents. And that is the uncle on the back left standing. And the one standing in front of me was my father. And so some ancient pictures of relatives, great-grandparents, history of Cornelius School. This photograph is 1896, and number 10 is one grandmother, and number 33 is the other grandmother. Just remarkable that 1896 photograph could be restored and made into something usable. So I show that just to remind you that the technology has changed a lot in recent years. And there, my grandfather, his family. There's a Bible, he read it every day for, how many times? 28 times, I think, through the whole Bible. play the violin, map, postcards that were sent. There's the farmhouse, there's the uncle. Anyway, give you some sense of what's the technology has made possible in the last few years that would have been lost.
Good.
So that's it.
What questions do you have about anything we've said so far?
You just start with loose leaf paper and that you can move around and things that come into your head and whatever, or something more formal. Because I can't see that myself sitting down in front of a computer with a Word document, writing it. I see things as popping into my head and,
Yeah.
I remember that trip and this story and that story and.
Yeah, I would say even index cards are a good way of
Uh-huh.
capturing that,
That's a good idea.
There's a little program called Scrivener, Scrivener, which basically does exactly that. It puts little snippets on index cards electronically so you can pull them into your document wherever you want to. But it doesn't matter. It's
I
up to
can't
you.
see, doing it with like a hardback notebook or.
Well, the technology has changed. There's a free piece of software that if you have an audio recording, if you just sit down and read it into a tape recorder, it will type it for you, turn it into text.
And your phone can do that.
And your phone will do it, like if you're, and you can send yourself an email message. So it's whatever, and if it's a typed manuscript, optical character recognition does a fantastic job from typing. So you can turn it, reverse engineer it from typed on a page into an editable thing that you put into a book and formatted. So you can start wherever you feel comfortable.
And regardless of which one of those technologies you use, I would suggest that you go back and look at whatever document you've written and add the descriptive phrasing and stuff that you missed when you dictated or when you first write a first draft, because that's what makes it interesting, all the colorful things that you can.
The details. The details matter.
Yeah.
Got
What
it.
other questions do you have? Yes.
I was kind of curious how, to what degree you knew what you were going to talk about and how you were going to organize it before you went into the process, or how much that was emergent from the material itself?
Well, I'm sort of a free thinker, so I probably should have used more discipline than I did. As I said earlier, it's almost impossible to stay in a strict chronological event because things move around on you as you're talking. But I would suggest you use this outline or something to put at least the beginnings of a structure to it and then modify it as you need.
I think for people approach this process differently depending on their own personality and thinking style and so forth. And if you are a more procedural 1, 2, 3 person, then following the chronological order will feel comfortable to you. If that doesn't feel comfortable to you, it seems to me that it's possible to use the outline that's been given here, the chronological one, and then think about what memories you have around that particular aspect of your life. And often our memories are linked or embedded with sensory memories. And that's why as we approach dementia, a certain song will trigger some kind of memory, or smell, or a taste, or a touch. And so if we can spend some time in reflection and go back to the sensory memories, they're often the richest ones, just like this piece that Jerry read. But remember that memory and sense are linked. And so it's not just the cerebral, what were the facts. I graduated this year, we went to this party or whatever, but what were the sensory details of that event that embedded it? Because all of us remember some things about our childhood and have no memory of others at all. And so sometimes we can access those memories with the senses.
Yes.
I used a different approach and figured out why we came to the United States. And I just finished my husband, they came in 1740 from France during the persecution, the religious persecution, and then they were in Appalachia. Why they move from Appalachia, we get to Ohio, and they had, the government gave them stipends if they'd been in the war, Revolutionary War, and how they ended up in Iowa.
Yeah, what story, that's a great story.
And I'm in the process of my father's, and he came from Bohemia, which is now Czech Republic, and that they were, for 1,000 years, were the power in Eastern Europe.
Mhm.
And I thought people should know some of that background too. I was an Eastern major, so that interests me. But, and I think, you know, if I didn't put that in the document, I put that in a separate appendix. Some of those, why did we come to Chicago? Because it was the third largest populous city, the Czech population, and so forth. And they came in 1882 in the Austrian Empire. And then the documents, some places they were from Bohemia, some places they were from Austria. My sister said we were from Austria. I said, but that's because the Austrian-Hungarian Empire was power then, but they really were from Bohemia part of it.
Right.
So I thought that would make it interesting to people rather than just a bunch of
Absolutely.
what I did this and that.
Anything that adds to the mood or the tone or the feeling of that would be helpful, yes.
For some years, I worked as a volunteer with hospice, and instead of doing autobiographies, the nurses would identify somebody, perhaps a young mother or father who was dying and needed help. And generally they're under too much anesthesia meds to do any letter writing on their own. And I would create, by interviewing them, I would create letters for their children to leave behind. And it was very meaningful for those families. I did it for older people too, for sometimes a whole group letter for the whole family, you know, get along, keep eating together, love each other. My father had done that for us, and his was very brief, but it was very, very helpful. And my best memories were of children that received these letters and had them framed.
That's great.
Now, they thought their parent wrote it. I was totally anonymous.
Right.
And one time a 12-year-old girl got up at her mother's funeral and read the letter that her mother left behind for her. She still doesn't know. There were 12 letters in all for different stages of her life. And she's now a dentist someplace or other. She doesn't even know that I had a part in that.
Yes.
Letters when it's too late for the person to write them. And they're letters of affirmation. They're not history. They are, here's what I cherish about you.
Yeah.
Here's my hopes and aspirations for you. Sometimes they want their faith passed on. I'll put in Bible verses that are meaningful. So it's a little different thing, and it's for other people, and it's not their life. By that point, they did not want their life recorded. They wanted to pass something on to the next, about their love.
That's excellent.
And sometimes forgiveness.
Yeah.
There was a stepson that hadn't spoken to her in years, and I helped her frame a letter of forgiveness and love.
It's wonderful.
Must
When
have
I-
been very meaningful for you.
Oh, I
When I
loved
did
it.
my,
I loved it.
When I did my family history, my mother's side of the family, after my mom had died, I stumbled onto all these female letters from the war. You remember what I'm talking about? The photocopied letters that the censors sent on through after they did all the redacting and everything. And I had a choice to either putting the content in there in text or actually photocopying the document itself. But it was really powerful to see those documents just as they were delivered with all the editing and censorship and everything. It just added so much flavor. Yes.
And if anyone here is a hospice person who goes to someone who is like the family, I do encourage, and this is what happened with my husband. The hospice person came and says, now you come to me, you come and sit with us. And he made some excuse that we want to find out a few things to fill in the forms. And what the hospice person really did was ask my husband, for instance, what do you consider the biggest accomplishment in your life? Or things like that that I didn't know. And here this hospice person enlightened me about things that my husband felt as he was dying, but thinking of his own life. And so if anybody is in that position as a hospice person, I encourage you to do something like that with the spouse or a daughter or son, to hear what the dying person answers, how they answer various questions about their lives.
That's great.
That you otherwise might not know.
Here is a V-mail letter that one and my sister did, and this was the roughly the physical size, and she transcribed it, and it was laid out line by line so you could read it without having to struggle with reading it.
Yeah, good. What other questions or thoughts do you have?
I have one comment.
Yes.
When you remember all of these events, be sure to include your feelings about them.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's it.
Sweet.
Even if it's chronological, you can include your feelings.
Anything else? Want to give you time to come up here and look at any of these documents that you want. Some of the ones that I put here are not technically memoirs, but they are books that you can see how they might look as a hardback versus a soft cover and that sort of thing. And thank you all for coming.
And the videos are not up there because you can't see them without an instrument. So if there were a video you wanted to see, let me know and I'll bring it up for you. Thanks for coming.
I'm not a writer, I don't have written.
Good. Good. Thank you for sharing that. Well, I'm sure.
Is there encouragement with it, right, when it started off with this format? As it started, like yours.
The simplest way for someone like me to take a hard copy is to put it in a book as text. Because pretty much ignored the format. Then I had to reformat it with the picture back there. Very few formats translate well maybe even a Word document. If it's not a PDF, I prefer to start with text document and some instructions, because the text is hard to upside down.
Nice to see you, Betty.
Good to see you.
Do you have a table of illustrations and stuff like that?
Stuff like that is novel.
Yes. So, yeah, just adopt here. Even if it's a word now, you can save it as adopt here. And you ought to do that. Consider this, if you give it to me, your version of Word, I'm putting my version of Word, whether that's going to translate it. If it's an old document.
Just hand it to Jerry. Jerry.
So the text is just the safest way to do it. Thank you.